Okay. Hello, everyone. We had some technical problems here, so I apologize for that. Welcome to today's event, the first panel of our webinar series on why women write, and hopefully we will have our second panel next Saturday. This event is hosted by the Department of Cross-Cultural and Regional Studies at the University of Copenhagen and IUAES Commission on Transnational Feminism and Queer Politics. My name is Nasim Basiri, and I am a PhD student in Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies at Oregon State University, and the co-founder of the Commission on Transnational Feminism and Queer Politics at International Union of Anthropological and Ethnological Sciences. I will be moderating today's session with my colleague Ozlem from the University of Copenhagen. Ozlem had also some, voice problems today, but
unfortunately.
So Ozlem, can you please introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Nasim. Hi, everyone. My name is Ozlem. I am a PhD student in the Department of Cross-Cultural and Regional Studies at Copenhagen University. And I'm very glad to be moderating today's webinar with my dear friend and colleague, Nasim. And thank you everyone for your participations.
Thank you. We're also really glad to bring all these wonderful writers and artists together in a panel today, all together. And I think it's very moving that in a time of isolation and kind of depression, to address and talk about, these journeys as authors and as writers and artists, of course, on why it is important to them to write. Why do they write? A few days ago, we all saw how a woman, Amanda Gorman, excited the entire world through her poetry and through her unique voice, and also her presence. And that meant a lot, not only to the people here in the United States, but also to the entire world. So let's hear from our speakers today. Our honorable guests today are Nooshan Shakarabi, who is a poet and professor, Jasmin Darznik, professor and author, Usha Akella, author and founder of Matbala. Shokufeh Kavani is a translator and visual artist. Anjali Purohit is artist, writer, poet, and translator. So after we're done with all the talks, please just ask any questions that you have in mind from the speakers, or you can write them all down in the chat box during the event. So me and Ozlem will check and we will ask the questions. Our first speaker is Anjali Purohit. Anjali is an artist, writer, poet, translator, and curator. She's the author of 2 books, Ragini, Chronicles from Aji Kitchen, and Go Talk to the River, among several of her other publications. Her writing has featured in several anthologies and literary journals, including Indian Quarterly, Open Your Eyes, an anthology of climate change, anthology of contemporary Indian poetry, and so many other publications. She's the founder and curator of the Cappuccino Ada, an initiative working to foster a literary cafe culture in Bombay and to contribute to building a vibrant writers community. She's presently working on her forthcoming book of poetry. Anjali lives in Bombay with her mom, a spouse, and equanimous disposition and fond memories of Misty, her dog. She holds a PhD in philosophy from the Bombay University. Welcome, Anjali, and we invite you to deliver your talk.
Thank you, Nasim.
Anjali?
I'm here. Thank you, Nasim. You can hear me? Yeah.
Yes, yeah, we hear you well.
I'm really honored to be amongst, and really congratulations to you, Nasim, and to the University of Copenhagen as well as Oregon for putting together these diverse voices so that we can share, find what is common experiences amongst us and appreciate the diversity that is amongst us. And I believe that partly that sharing is why women write as well often. I would like to just give you a very short glimpse of why women have written in India. And especially, I would focus on the state of Maharashtra from where I come. Of course, why women write is a huge topic, and we could have several, and I look forward to several more discussions with different writers on this subject. But I would just highlight two or three small points. One of them being, of course, that we share this with all humankind, that we write to validate our existence, to right since 40,000 BCE, when the first human put her palm print on the caves. They wanted to leave a mark of themselves on the earth. And this is something I believe is unique to us. As when it comes to women, we are in a very unique position, because even today we are isolated in our homes. We are always told that this is your primary task and duty, to see that the house runs. After that, if there is time, then you can do what else you want. Because of this, a majority of women are isolated, and women want to give meaning to her life as an individual, and not just as a cog in the domestic wheel that keeps the household moving, to share her joys and her troubles, her thoughts with others, and especially with other women, in order to feel that she is not alone in feeling this, and also in order to tell other women that yes, I also share what you are going through. And this is best done through writing. And here, and you'll realize why I say this later, I take writing as authoring. So in India, especially, where education was denied to a gender or given second priority, a lot of women did not know to read or write. That does not mean they did not author, because their experiences were translated through storytelling, through song, through verse. And mostly this was, an oral way of writing, and I include that in writing. Um, actually, what I feel is that in an admittedly patriarchal society that smoothly fits into and feeds the interests of capitalist exploitation, where the needs and desires for community, for sharing and building bonds are sought to be curtailed for the mass of the people. And in respect of women, these are ignored and considered completely dispensable. Or else, these needs are diverted into activities that are superficial and bereft of any meaning. Activities like concentrating on the way you look or dress or the size that you are. These things are implanted and said that this is what you should be doing. In this situation, then, writing becomes a liberating activity. And here again, like I said, I mean writing as expressing in words, whether oral or on paper. It was song and verse which, in fact, attracted me. In this context, I'd like to speak about Bahinabai Chaudhary, the book you spoke about, Nasim, which was Go Talk to the River, is a translation into English of the OVs of a woman called Bahinabai Chaudhary, who lived about 150 years ago in a small village in Maharashtra called Asoda. She was a peasant. She didn't know how to read or write, but she sang these OVs. OVs are verse in couplet form, which are sung by women in this state as they work. Today, people have also labeled them as grinding mill songs, because as the women sat at the grinding mill grinding grain every day, they sang these songs. So these were work songs, but while other OVs in earlier times were about God, religion, morality, mythology, Bahinabai Chaudhary, who was a peasant, wrote about her work. And that is why I think she is important. She wrote about her work in the house, and she wrote extensively, poems to the grinding wheel, to the stove. She addresses it as if it was a person, as if it was her friend, and to all the implements that she uses, even the funnel that she uses to light the fires. And she would sing these songs. Later, someone wrote them down and it got published, and she became famous after she died. So I think as a means of lessening the burden that is on them, women compose these songs, these poems, and these writings. Secondly, when domestic situations get very oppressive, some very famous poets in India, and I'm sure elsewhere, have found a way to deal with that by going into spirituality. So they are able to break out of the patriarchal system by what one would call a subversive spirituality. We have saint poets, the whole bhakti tradition, poets such as Andal, who was also translated into English very beautifully by Priya Saruka Chabria. Muktabai, Janabai, Kanhopatra, who was born into the house of a prostitute. And she preferred to go and sing outside the temple. And she became famous, and her poems became famous as a saint poet. Earlier, again, another saint called Saint Bahinabai again. She had a very troubled married life. She was married at the age of 3 to a man who was 30 years old. And she had a very difficult married life. She found a way, an outlet, one would say, in poetry, and poetry about bhakti. She was dragged by her hair, tied up at home, beaten, but nevertheless, she kept to this path. This is, of course, what happened 100, 300 years ago, but women have still found ways. In the 20th century, when education became more available to women in India, especially in the upper classes, there were a lot of women writers, I would say like Amrita Pritam, Ismat Chugtai, Kuratulin Haidar, Mahashweta Devi, who again broke traditions and wrote, asserting their sexuality. Now the last thing I would like to bring about, because I think I would like to listen to everyone else speak as well, is that in India, there is not only the oppression of class and patriarchy, there is also the oppression of the caste system. And this, in recent times especially, this is a very vast area, but just to touch upon it, the struggle of Dalit women in India is a struggle against a caste-ridden patriarchy. So not only are they facing discriminations of caste, they are facing discriminations even in their own homes doubly. In that, one writer I would like to mention is Urmila Pawar, who wrote very beautifully about her life, and she was also very active in the Dalit movement. And in fact, she wrote a whole history of women in the Dalit movement of Dr. Ambedkar. She has written Aidan, which is her autobiography, and it is translated into English recently in the name of The Weave of My Life. And Urmila, I heard her once because we were in a workshop together, and she said that not only she had to struggle to write, she was not allowed to write even by her husband, who was part of the Dalit movement, but he frowned upon her writing or trying to write. So she says, I used to get up in the night, the lights would be off, and I would write. And she had learned how to write in the dark. So in this particular book, I'll end with this quote from Urmila Pawar from her book, Aidan. My mother used to weave aidans, the Marathi generic term for all things made out of bamboo. I find that her act of weaving and my act of writing are organically linked. The weave is similar. It is the weave of pain, suffering, and agony that links us. So with that, Nasim, thank you very much for so patiently listening. I hand over the mic to you.
So much. Thank you. We learned a lot from that. I lived in India for 5 years, so I totally understand what you're talking about, especially because I had so many conversations with poets, writers there, and I really appreciate that you brought all this very insightful experiences and stories here today. Thank you. So our second speaker is Jasmin Darznik. Jasmin is the New York Times best-selling author of The Bohemians, a novel that imagines the friendship between photographer Dorothea Lange and her Chinese-American assistant in 1920 San Francisco. Her debut novel, Song of a Captive Bird, was a New York Times Book Review Editor's Choice book and a Los Angeles Times bestseller. Darznik is also the author of The Good Daughter, a memoir of my mother's hidden life. Her books have been published in 17 countries, and her essays have appeared in New York Times, Washington Post, and Los Angeles Times, among others. Darznik was born in Iran and came to America when she was 5 years old. She holds an MFA in fiction from Bennington College, a JD from the University of California, and a PhD in English from Princeton University. Now a professor of English and creative writing at California College of the Arts. She lives in San Francisco Bay Area with her family. Welcome, Jasmin. And we're so excited to hear from you about your story and what you have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So let me first start by also expressing my gratitude and my joy in being here with all of you. This is such a beautiful gathering across the planet. How amazing this is. And thank you, Anjali, for opening with so many thoughtful and provocative comments. I also felt very connected to what you were saying, and I'll be excited to talk with you and everyone else in the informal discussions also afterwards. So my talk is going to be just a little bit more formal. Forgive me, I am going to read mostly, but like I said, I'm happy, later on I'll speak, less formally with you. When I was thinking about the very provocative title of our talk, of our gathering today, why do women write? Of course, it's so expansive. It has echoes of that Freudian question, what do women want, also, which has been debated now, for over a century. And as I was thinking about it these last couple of weeks, as that question was rattling around in my head, I had so many thoughts, but the one that I return to most often is I write because I must. I write because I must. There's no other good reason for it. I think if I felt less compelled to, I probably wouldn't do it. But it's been the great fortune of my life, and it has really come for me out of a sense of necessity. Survival, I would even say, survival. So I will start with my my thoughts on this topic. Short answer is I write because I must, and the longer answer is this. I write because I'm a person, a woman who has been blessed with an ear for language and for stories. I write because I came from a mostly unhappy childhood. I write because I come from a family full of, to put it mildly, characters. A family full of characters. Literature has defined me first as a reader and more recently as a writer. Word by word, page by page, I have created myself, and I have survived so much through my writing. I think a lot about my writing as a process that comes out of looking back in time and history at stories and looking for the stories that haven't been told. Now, all of us, if we're writing about women, we encounter an abyss or an absence or a record that is shot through with all kinds of silences. I loved, Anjali, that you were talking about the oral storytelling tradition. As beautiful and life-sustaining as that is, it's in some ways it's ephemeral because it's not written down, right? It has no house, it has no secure place in an archive or a library, and it's very vulnerable, I think. And so at that moment in time when women have been able to take their stories and their poems and to put them into words, I think that opens up a lot of possibilities. But there has not always been, and I think there still isn't, the necessary respect and the attention to those writings. So even now that we have them, they're still vulnerable. I think in a sense they're still vulnerable, and we're in danger also of forgetting and losing those if we don't pay better attention to them. So I'll tell you a little bit about my writing. As Nasim John was saying, I've written 3 books now. The first book that I wrote is the story of my mother's life. It runs from about 1920 in Iran until about the year 2000. It tells a story that she had suppressed. She'd kept her life story secret for over 50 years. I found out by accident that my mother had had a child that she'd given up. She was married when she was 13, and she surrendered her child, as was the custom in Iran at that time, when she was 14 years old, and was told subsequently, she was actually told, you can only get a divorce if you never tell anyone that this happened, essentially. So she told no one. I didn't know growing up about her first marriage and about this half sister I had. So that project was really, I would describe it as an oral history. It was a process of sitting with my mother for about 2 years and excavating the story of her life from her through conversations. The second book I wrote is a novel called Song of a Captive Bird. It is a novel about Iran's, I feel very comfortable saying the greatest Iranian poet of the 20th century, the poet Purohit, who she's known, I think, throughout the Middle East, but really very, very obscure, I think, outside of the Middle East. But for Iranians, she is such an icon. She's an icon. So the second novel was her story, and then the third book that is just coming out in April, in a couple of months. It's my first my first book that's not about Iran. It's about Dorothea Lange, the great American photographer living in 1920 San Francisco. So it's my first book set on American soil. It is preoccupied by a lot of the same ghosts and riddles, such as the relationships between women, violence against women. In this case, I'm also looking at immigration and the history of white nationalism in California. So there are through lines, but it's a bit of a departure because I'm now writing into and about the American experience. If I could draw a through line through these different projects, I'd say I'm obsessed with the possibilities and limitations of telling stories that have been erased from or were never contained inside the historical record. So looking for what's not there is an essential part of my process as a writer. The poet Wordsworth, the English poet Wordsworth, has a remark that a writer is somebody who's more affected than other people by absences, more than what's present. Absence has a particular resonance for us, for those of us who write about women's lives. We're continually forced to grapple with the absences in the archive, the limits of what it contains, the question of who has been deemed worthy of having their story remembered. And so you're looking really, I think so beautifully, Anjali was talking about, you're looking at a record also as who has been counted as human, who has been counted human, and women so very often and still have not been counted as fully human. And the attention to their writing, to their voices, to their literature reflects that. It's precisely this absence, though, that compels me to write, and I think that that's probably the case for many of us in this gathering today. It transcends genre and subject matter. I think, to paraphrase Toni Morrison, this is one of my favorite lines about writing: one must write the books one can't find. So this is one of the driving forces in my life, has been to look at the spaces on the shelf, so to speak, where there are gaps, and to write the stories that might fill in some of those spaces on the shelf of the human story. I also wanted to bring in here also this idea. This is Charles Baxter, who's an American writer. He has this notion of a dysfunctional narrative that I think is useful for us when we're thinking about the question of why women write and what they write about. He talks about a dysfunctional narrative as a story that we can't leave behind. We can't put it to rest. It somehow evades our ability to capture it. And he gives an example of the Kennedy assassination. I mean, there's just, that story is one that we've heard, we've seen it in films, there's so many books, but it eludes and evades capture in a sense. There's no way, or there hasn't been any sort of conclusive way of holding that story. And so he thinks about, as just an example, as a dysfunctional narrative, the Kennedy assassination. as a story that we continue to tell precisely because it can't be told. And I think that this is in part the riddle of women's writing too, is how do you capture something that is, it's wily, it's difficult to hold, it's difficult to capture. And since I come out of the Iranian context, Iranian culture, Iranian history, our history is so full of dysfunctional narratives. There is so much that for reason of political repression, through a function of immigration, exile, all these violent ruptures that we've experienced from our past make it impossible, at least very difficult, to tell our story. We're looking at such a broken and shattered record. But this is the place where we come in with our stories. And maybe because I'm a novelist, I'm going to make a case that the work we do is work that can't be done in any other place. That through fiction, through poetry, through stories, we can, if not make whole these dysfunctional narratives of our history, we can begin to mend them. We can make those sutures just a little bit less violent in their rupture. To do this, I think we have to push past what has been written and look really deeply into why and who and how has been who has been able to write and how they have been able to do that. I think also if you know the wonderful American academic, African-American scholar of African-American women's lives, Saida Hartman, she's been so, to me, inspiring in her theory about this subject. She's writing about African-American women at the beginning of the 20th century. So this is, of course, it's a different context, but I think there are meaningful parallels between different communities, different groups of women, and in her theorizing about the lives of African-American women, why they have not been told, how we might begin to tell them now, she talks about the necessity of bringing together, weaving, melding, merging research and imagination. And I want to posit that also as at least for me, a really productive exercise to look seriously at what's not there and then begin to fill that space with my imagination. I wanted to tell you just as a few examples of this, how this translates. So that's the theory of it, and how has it, translated, at least in my writing life. If I won't presume that people know Furuh Farrokhzad's story, but she was a poet who lived in Iran from 1935 to 1967. She died in 1967 in a car accident, in a car crash. Her death is gloriously mythologized. It is one of those dysfunctional narratives that it is told and it is told and it has been told, and people have tried to capture it, and it has evaded grasp, I think. And when I was looking at Furuh's life, I knew it would not be possible. It wouldn't be satisfying for me, at least, to try to write it as a biography, because 50 years have passed since her passing. Even at the time she passed, so many records about her life and her death were destroyed at the time. And 50 years on, the record has been further degraded. People have passed on. A lot of people have reasons to withhold their stories or to tell only part of the story of who she was. And so I knew when I was thinking about how I wanted to come at Furuh's life, that a biography was not going to do it, at least not for me. It was not going to tell that story. And that only by, as I say, melding and bridging research and imagination was I going to approach a kind of truth about her that might begin to mend the dysfunctional narrative of her life. So that is sort of an example. And I was thinking, I'd give you maybe a particular instance of how I did this. So Furuh was a poet. She left an extraordinary body of work behind. And for me, that was the research component. I read very deeply into her poetry, into the body of literature that she had left behind. And I used that as almost a map or a template for how I wrote about her life, about who she was. one motif I imagined, and it's a little bit, it's a little bit of a mystical thing, but I could say it's almost like, absorbing what was there and trying to find patterns, patterns of what was not quite spoken or only hinted at in her life. And so, as an example, there are many allusions to violence, particularly violence against the female body, sexual violence, to virginity that's violently rent asunder, for example. And so I placed those instances, those evocations of those motifs in her work against her life. And I started to imagine the scenes that might have given birth or given cause for the writing of those poems, of that poetry. So the Song of a Captive Bird opens with a scene where Furul is taken for an examination, a virginity test, which my mother was a midwife in Iran in the 50s and 60s, and she gave a lot of these tests. She performed a lot of these tests, and it was also performed on her before her marriage. And knowing that, having come to Furul's story with that, I was able then to imagine the scene before her marriage and to imagine why Furul was married as early as she was, and to begin to imagine almost the psychic circumstances that then later give birth to the poems she wrote about her life and about women's lives. So that might be a little bit, it would be easier if I could read it to you. I won't read it to you, but just to demonstrate a bit of this alchemy between the research and the imagination, and how possibly the outcome of that is a story that's not truth in a historical sense, but it gets to a kind of poetic or psychological truth that otherwise might elude us as we look at a woman's life. A couple of more remarks. I think I'm coming to the end of my time. What should I say about this topic? I think I'll more or less sum up now and just think a little bit more broadly about myself and a writer, and to pull that thread a little bit back to that question that we started with, is why do women write? And to speak very intimately of my own experience, life isn't real to me unless I write. It's not real until I write about it. I write because I want to defy, in some small measure, the passage of time and the violence of forgetting. These are, I think, at heart, it's the essence. Writing is a solitary venture, but it's in some ways the most connected you could be to other humans on the planet. I say things in my writing that maybe people who see me on a daily basis don't know about me. There is a truth that I can tell in my stories, in my writing, that I'm not always brave enough to tell in the ordinary course of my life. It's a journey back to memory. It's an excavation of the soul. It's a sitting with tradition. It's an interrogation of tradition. It's born of a desire to be remembered and to remember. I write because I know no greater joy than to make something beautiful. I think that it's something, as Anjali was saying, that is timeless in a sense, and yet binds us to the times in which we live. It joins us to human history, but it also drives us deeper into the experience of our own lives as we're living it. I have such a reverence for writers, and if in some small measure I can give what's been given to me through literature, that will be a satisfying life for me, I think. It's an offering. I think of that word, the word gift, offering. It really, there's no rational reason I can think about it. For sure, there's no justification in a economic way to write. You know, there are so many more productive ways of spending one's time. I would never recommend writing to anyone who did not feel that they absolutely had to do it and there was no other way for them to live. I wouldn't recommend it. And when I counsel my students, it's a bit, you know, it's a bit of a test, you know. Is it something you feel you must do? If you don't feel you have to do it, don't. You know, there are others who will step forward. But I think they often rise to that challenge because it is such a human impulse. We want to make sense of our passage across this planet, and we want to be remembered. So I'll finish. I think that was, you know, I have all kinds of thoughts and feelings about this, but last thing I would say about it is that it is a gesture back toward those who came before us, and hopefully also a gesture toward those who come after us.
Thank you so much, Jasmin. I mean, it was really amazing to hear all your thoughts and experiences, also the arguments that you brought here today. Very precious, because I mean, really interested in the feminist literature and it's a part of my research, but I think that we need to write several dissertations on every arguments you made today here. And as an Iranian, as well now in the United States, but Iranian diaspora, I think, should be very proud of your existence and the wonderful, unique literary works that you have introduced to the West that often goes marginalized and overlooked here. So thank you so much for that. And we got some comments here for you. One is from, and also for Anjali, from Professor Yakubi says, the Song of Captive is awesome. And Katya the USA says, thank you, Jasmin. I've been obsessed with Dorothea Lange this week and her photographs from the Dust Bowl era. The Code by Toni Morrison is driving force behind my work as well. Anjali, we got a comment from you. First of all, a lot of people thank you. And then Pramila Venkat Warren says, Anjali, thanks for your wonderful presentation. So we're moving to the next panelist, who is Nooshan Shakarabi. Nooshan is an Iranian-born poet and professor of political science. She works as a professor and department chair of the political science at Santiago Canyon College in Orange, California, where she taught for 21 years so far. Professor Shakarabi immigrated to the United States at the age of 10 in 1984 with her family. Nooshan has co-authored and authored textbooks in American politics and articles in international relations and Middle Eastern and North African politics. As a poetess, she has written numerous pieces of poetry and has published 3 books of contemporary poetry called Seasons. The latest volume was just released in January of 2021. So congrats, Nooshan, and thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you. Thank you, Nasim Jen, for putting this together. This is really an international panel, and I'm so sorry for everyone that it's really early in the morning for you, especially Shokufeh June, and very late for you, Anjali. And this connection became possible by another woman who is wonderful, and that's Dr. Claudia Yakubi, who I served on a panel with in November, and she connected with Nasim. So I really appreciate this effort, and I'm honored to be here, and it's wonderful to hear your stories. I've been Googling everyone to get to know your works a little bit more. I'm a poetess by accident, really. All of my background is in political science. That's what I've studied. I went to law school for a year, and decided that wasn't for me, but I studied political science for undergrad and graduate school. So the writing, the publications that I did all began in politics, American politics, Middle Eastern politics, North African politics. And frankly, through the years of not so much undergrad, but maybe graduate school, and then shortly after, I started journaling, just as many people do, just my thoughts, my worries, my concerns. And I realized that I can write and express myself much more freely. And Jasmin alluded to this as well. It was really a way for me to talk about certain things that maybe I didn't have the courage to talk about, or I didn't even think anyone would be interested. You know, I think the younger you are, the less confidence you have in the validity of your thoughts and your feelings. And I thought, well, nobody wants to hear this. So I journaled. And then that journaling continued further. And then I slowly started to put some things together that at first I thought this kind of looks like a poem because I didn't have any official training in it. My background was just this kind of harsh, you know, kind of confined to a really male dominated academic career of lots of men being in political science, and me being kind of one of the first few women in my little community that went into political science. And so I really think I began writing selfishly because it was my outlet and it was my thoughts, and nobody was going to see it and nobody was going to be interested. And then after some time went by and I began a full-time career as a political scientist at Santiago Canyon College, one of my colleagues and dear friends said, was in my office one day and said, "What is this?" And I had a manuscript and scribbled in it because I still do longhand. I have to write everything out and then I'll type it because I like to torture myself that way. But she said to me, "What is it? You write poems?" And I said, "Yeah." She goes, "May I read them?" I said, "Yeah." And she read them and she liked them, and then she kept reading them, and then she kept passing them on, and put a lot of pressure on me to publish them. And I said, nobody's going to publish these. Nobody's going to want to hear these stories. And then I thought maybe my story is pretty common. I'm an immigrant. I came here when I was very young. I know the Iranian Revolution. I know the Iran-Iraq War. I know all of these ups and downs, and everybody has a story. It might be repetitive. And she said, it doesn't matter. It's worthy. You don't know who else you're going to be helping. Because some of the poems were about immigration, and some of them were about love, and some of them were about pain, and some of them were about joy. And so that's how Seasons came to be in 2009 and 2011 with the first two, and then the one that I just had published in 2021, Seasons 3, which is kind of the end of this trilogy of seasons. And I think that I was thinking a lot about today and how we would kind of go about this and why women write. And I think for most of us, it seems like it's a form of expression, but I think it's the best form of expressing love for yourself, love for your community, for your family, for your experiences. There's a lot of longing, I think, that we all carry, especially if you're an immigrant. And I think this gives you a way to I think, in a safe space of that, you know, pad of paper and that pencil, to just let it out. There's no judgment when you're writing the first draft before you start critiquing yourself. And it gives you a kind of an open space, a safe space, I think, to express yourself. The older I get, the more I think about sort of my culture with all of its wonderful intricate details and all the pride that I have at being an Iranian woman, but I also am very aware of sort of the expectations, the pressures that are placed on Iranian women. Again, whether it's about your looks, whether it's about your sexuality, whether it's about being given permission to speak. You know, I write about things that, as Jasmin was referencing, maybe people wouldn't think that I would write about. And there have been many people who've said, well, why did you write about that? Or why did you express that? Or that's pretty personal, or, you know, that was kind of a provocative thing to say. But I think that's exactly the point. The point of writing is an expression of love, an expression of feeling, and really building your own confidence in being a human being, that I have a right to have these feelings. And as a woman or a man across the world reads this poem, they're going to relate to some piece of it. Maybe they'll relate to divorce. Maybe they'll relate to issues in the family. Maybe they'll relate to a broken relationship. Maybe they'll relate to economic struggles or war or whatever it might be. So I think for me, if it was something that was kind of accidentally coming into fruition and maybe started from a selfish place of, I need a place to vent and I need a place to release whatever it is that I was feeling. I've noticed through the years, it's turned into a form of service for me. Now I feel like, oh, I'm writing this because I have a friend of mine in mind, or I have my mother in mind, or I have my nephews in mind, or I'm thinking about something that happened in Iran, but people in Yemen can relate to this too. People in India can relate to this too. And I think in the last 4 years, especially because of the events that took place during the Trump administration, and because I do teach politics and I'm in the trenches every day, and I have to, hold my tongue a lot because I have to teach as objectively as I possibly can. The place that I don't have to have those limitations on myself is in my poems. I don't have to be politically correct. I don't have to worry about whose feelings I'm going to hurt. I don't have to worry about an administrator or a student being offended. It's my space and I get to do whatever I want to do. But in that selfishness and that desire to express, you may have inadvertently helped somebody else. And it's important to do that, especially women of color, especially specifically Iranian women. We need to move away from some of the, I think, overtly sexist and misogynist sort of expectations and, encompassing us in those particular roles, get away from that and have a newer experience. My poems are contemporary. I write contemporary poems. My idol is Purohit Farrokhzad. I think she is really, as Jasmin said, not only an icon, but I think just an extraordinary story for the world to share, and the world should know Purohit. It really is unfortunate that outside of our community or outside of our culture, not a lot of people know about her. Thanks to Jasmin, now they do. But I think it's important for us to set some new standards, create some new traditions, and it doesn't necessarily have to look like the experiences of those who came before us. When I think about somebody like Nasrin Sotoudeh and her struggles, and the latest documentary that she had, which one of my former students actually was a translator on the film, who I'm very proud of, Paris Assange, if you're watching, I'm so proud of you. But I was thinking about how incredibly committed this woman is, not just for all the suffering that she's had of being imprisoned and going on hunger strikes and being away from her children and basically her husband and not having a normal life that she richly deserves, but the way that she really got the world's attention, not just onto Iran and political prisoners, but the idea of feminism, the idea of the liberation of women, liberating our minds, our bodies, our beliefs, our dreams, doing certain things that our mothers and grandmothers never had the opportunity to do, being a good example for the future women, a younger generation ahead of us that are looking back at us, and just removing that element of shame and that, again, confining into some little boundary or some sort of expectation that society has for us. I think it's very important that women answer the question of why women write, because oftentimes men have answered that question. What women are thinking, what women are feeling, how to deal with a woman, and I think that constantly puts us in this situation where we have to defend our gender and defend the validity of our being, and we don't have to do that anymore. I think this is a golden opportunity for us through these kinds of panels and through education and awareness and connection, and technology makes it easier. Now we're talking to each other from across the world, for us to create some new standards and to allow people to express themselves. I don't think even 5 years ago I would be speaking about this situation or this subject with as much, I guess you would call it, courage or confidence as I do now, because as you grow older and you have more experiences and hopefully wiser, you realize that what you feel and what you think does matter. And then it becomes a much more collectivist endeavor, because then you are more selfless and then you sort of give this service to other people. I teach because I serve. I write because it's my way of serving. I express because I know that somebody is going to read that particular line in a poem and they're going to connect to it. And that gives me satisfaction. Again, to go back what Jasmin told me, if you want to write in order to make money, it's not going to happen. I'm very happy that I have a full-time career, and I'm very blessed, because if this was not going to pay the bills at all. But you have to see it as a service. You have to and celebrate it and be proud of it. The idea of, I was thinking to myself the other day, I hid my poems for a very long time. If that's not shame, I don't know what it is. Because I was so afraid that somebody would think that they were ridiculous, or I was being too emotional, or I was being too sensitive, or I somehow was dysfunctional, or I was not able to express myself in a normal way, so I had to do these kind of secret writings. But I don't feel that way anymore. And when I do have my students write to me essays that may be a little bit more personal, let's say we're doing an essay in one of my courses in civil liberties and civil rights, and let's say I have a student who's an immigrant and talks about her family being political dissidents and they had to leave their country and take refuge someplace else. Once they get through the material and show me that they've done the reading and they understand the concepts, I always ask them, tell me what you think, tell me what you feel. Make sure that you do not remove yourself from the importance of how you felt when this happened to you. You don't have to just talk about that particular experience. And I think that has given some of my female students a little bit more courage to write. So then their essays are better. It's more quality. They see themselves in it more. And I think that's important. I had my students watch the Amanda Gorman poem at inauguration, and it's been translated into Farsi, by the way, and it's beautiful. And it's been translated to many, many languages. But I told them to listen to her and to find the courage and the beauty in her poetry, and use that yet as another role model to kind of push themselves ahead. So it no longer matters that whether I'm teaching political science or any of the subjects, for those of you that teach, there's always an opportunity to express yourself. Poetry, writing a short story, putting your opinion into an essay if it's appropriate and acceptable, even encouraging my female students to speak up more in class. Speak up. You don't have to wait for all the male students to, mansplain things to you and take over the conversation. Say something. And it doesn't have to be in any type of a combative or contentious place, but a safe haven, a place of learning, a place of bringing it together. So again, I write to survive. I write because it's the way I show my love. I write because it matters to my students. I write because it helps me feel more connected to other people, to my family, to my friends, to my experiences. And I cannot tell you how incredible it is to hear, even from the first two persons that went before me and now, and I'm sure the other panelists, that we all have this desire to break some sort of barrier that we feel has been placed there without our participation in it. And I think it's important for us to break the silence. Thank you.
Thank you, Nooshan. Thank you. I'm so glad you brought all those feelings here, because it's very important. It's very transformative, especially because we don't hear a lot from Iranian poets and writers' perspectives and the way they look at the world here in the United States. I'm sure that many of the Iranian activists, poets, writers, journalists, they are even afraid to talk about their past lives or past experiences. So this is amazing to have you here. And I hope that it can be a start point that the Western world and the Western academia will start to recognize Middle Eastern women's voices, and especially Iranian women's voices, because it has been demonized and also really politicized everywhere. So thank you so much for that. We have some more comments here. Usha says, Jasmin, what a wonderful presentation, heartfelt and informative. Claudia Yacobi says, so proud of you, Nooshan Jan. And then Professor Yacobi says, I teach a course on women writers at UNC Chapel Hill, and I always introduce Furugh Farrokhzad. I couldn't believe to receive an email from a former student who told me that during the pandemic, it's Furugh's poetry that is helping her survive. Wow. And yeah, why nobody knows Forough Farrokhzad in the West? Actually, one of my professors sent me an email 2 years back, and she's an American. She sent me a poetry of Forough Farrokhzad, and I was totally shocked because whenever I talked about Forough Farrokhzad in the West, nobody knew her. They had no idea who am I talking about, even though she was a big figure and icon in my own country. Katya Ulysses says, I write to survive. Thank you, Nooshan Shakarabi. Break the silence. And Parmila says, Nooshan, I appreciate your connection between writing and service. And yeah, so that's it for now. We're gonna go to Usha, and we're so honored, we're so happy to have Usha here with us today. Our fourth speaker, Usha Akella, has authored 4 books of poetry, 1 chapbook, and a script produced 2 musical dramas. Usha earned an MSc in creative writing from the University of Cambridge in UK, and her last poetry book, The Waiting, was published by Sahitya Academy in India in 2019, followed by Mantis Editors Mexico edition in Spanish, translated by Elsa Cross. Then Usha is also, she was selected as a creative ambassador for the city of Austin for 2019 and 2015. Her work has been included in HarperCollins Anthology of English Poets, and she's the founder of Matwala, which is the first South Asian Diaspora Poets Festival in the US that she co-directs with Pramila Venkates-Warren. The festival is seriously dedicated to increasing the visibility of South Asian poets in the mainstream. She's also the founder of Poetry Caravan in New York and Austin, which takes poetry readings to the disadvantaged women's shelters, hospitals, senior homes, and she has a big biography. So I'm gonna just summarize it. Usha has written a few non-fiction prose pieces published in The Statesman and India Currents, and her work ranges from feminist activists to spiritual and all things in between. Welcome, Usha.
Hello, namaste. So I'm just feeling a tremendous amount of gratitude, very moved by what I've heard so far. Many things resonating, learning new things. Nasim and Ozlem, thank you so much for including me and including my voice. I want to begin actually with a very, very short poem, which is upcoming as the opening poem in the second section of a book that will be released in April from Australia. The title of the book is I Will Not Bear You Sons. And the poem is called Women Speak. So I thought it was directly relevant to the forum today. Even if you feel your days are held in place with safety pins and you are unbuttoned by life daily, harangue the stars with your voices. They cannot be trusted. Speak, women. So that's almost like an epilogue to the book. And like Jasmin, I've gone a bit along the formal route, and I've penned a few thoughts and a little bit from my research and reasons as to why I write personally. So I'm going to read mostly off this paper. So what struck me, I thought it was very relevant to mention kind of the questions that this forum implies in the very topic. So do women write for reasons different than men? And do they write differently from men? Which in turn raises questions, is writing gender bound? Is there a universal reason to write irrespective of gender? And then a number of associated topics kind of came into my horizon as well. For example, the issue of why women writers adopt pseudonyms. Do women write better than men? What do women write about? How do reviewers view work written by women? Do reviewers seal the notion that women and men write about different things? Is it true that women write about family and men about war? Is there a divide between domestic and political? Do women put more of themselves in art? And when they do, is there a tendency to view it derogatorily or as relatable and frivolous? Is it true that men write about serious issues and women don't? So many interesting ramifications that we cannot explore in the timeline that we have right now. But I thought it was important to share some of the questions that were aligned with this topic. And it's just absolutely fascinating. And I think we can have a forum for each of them to explore what each of these things means. Going into a bit of personal history, as a woman poet, I know it is important to name my experience and to take ownership of my story and how it is told. Writing for me ties in with the larger aspect of meaning making and validating my experience as female. Also, it has been almost a duty to make a female narrative being heard and validated in the telling of it. Bringing issues into the mainstream, telling women's stories from her point of view, and then to the most vital of it all, breaking barriers and creating community, as we are doing now across distance and time. So why do I write? I write because this is how I learned to be. It was my way of breathing. I found my voice literally and metaphorically with a poem about arranged marriages in 1994 titled No, which paradoxically resounded yes, because it affirmed my experience and my life. It belonged to a larger book called Kali Dance's So Do I. It was relentlessly autobiographical, inescapably feminist, peppered with mythology and self-affirmation. It had a story to tell and wanted the world to listen. Early on, I understood I had to define my own feminism too. I did away with the term confessional to denote a type of poetry women write, a term pregnant with associations with Christianity, guilt, and subservience to authority. I prefer the term autobiographical as I don't think women need to confess their stories, but only choose to tell them and how they want to tell them. As a South Asian women poet, I learned to formulate the self through articulation and found empowerment lay in the ownership of one's story in the larger event of truth making. I learned my poetry could tell truths truer than fact once the courage of ownership happened. The poetry of Sharon Olds, Anne Sexton, Sylvia Plath, Kamala Das, and so many contemporary women poets who inspire me daily showed me how to embrace the entirety of a woman's psyche rooted in the body. These initial concerns in poetry have more or less remained the same and have broadened and magnified over the years, as will be reflected in the upcoming book that I mentioned, titled I Will Not Bear You Sons. I think the format of the book reflects my notions of why I write. The first section is of personal experience, and in the second, I address various issues from many cultures. It serves as a bridge to say I recognize a solidarity with you as a woman, and I want to write about these issues as a woman. The subject matter is freewheeling, spanning an arc from personal experiences to social issues like foot binding, FGM, myth, rape, mysticism, politics, terrorism, etc. Rewriting a narrative of patriarchy and selfhood defined by the Brahman yogi sensibility I was born into. And then concerning a specific feminism, there's another dimension. I've not hesitated to explore the spiritual in my poetry, which I directly attribute to my Indian roots, which was a collective oriented culture not afraid to ask spiritual questions of life and touch women and men equally in religious and spiritual practices. So kind of in a nutshell, that's what I felt like sharing, both from a personal account and from the larger context in which I write. And I'd like to end again with a poem, if there is time. Is there time?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And it's titled She's Speaking. And again, it's from the upcoming book, and it's dedicated to Kamala Harris. I thought it's a very timely poem to share. And the epigraph before the poem is, I didn't listen, and the people didn't listen either, and we won. And that was one of Kamala Harris's comments right after they won the election. The knee of a sown conscience compressed the country's gullet, the country a vulva cleaved in two, a salvo of wounds burgeoned from the fruiting body of one heart. The alphabet fell from her garland, these streets ledgers of lies and unbalanced history. You sprang from the house of triangles, rising with the sap of two bloods, a smile sure as the stalk of a lotus, spoke with a voice corded with the sinews of voices before you for the petaled voices to be. Wield the thunderbolt of Athena, guide our hand to pen new anthems, be the lungs for a forgotten dream, color the White House with holy colors, help women sleep in their bed blanketed with stars, bathed in the nectar of skin. Let hope again be a majestic elephant, fertilize our awakening on your petals, show us how from mud we can rise, teach us your chant, we did it, we do. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That was amazing. I don't know, but I told you before we start the webinar that how exciting it is to bring all these voices together today. And now I see it. I imagine this panel, and now I'm seeing it. So I am the most excited person here. Thank you. We have also some comments for you. Kashiana Singh says, we don't need to confess. Agree, Usha. Anil Matthew says, true, you confess to higher authority in Christianity, but here are just opening your soul to your fellow beings. Pramila says, Usha, what a lovely poem at the end. Thank you so much, Usha.
Thank you.
We have another comment from Pramila saying, interesting question. Some male poets dismiss women poets as domestic poets. Yeah. And that's very true. Very true. Or even sometimes they question that, why do you call the writings that are produced by women as women's writing? So you engage in a very discriminatory act. So yeah, we hear a lot of these comments every single day. Thank you. And we're gonna go to our final speaker today, Shokufeh Kavani, who has joined us from Sydney, Australia. Thank you, Shokufeh. I really appreciate it because I know it's like 5 or 6 in the morning right now, and it's difficult. So Shokufeh is an Iranian-Australian contemporary painter, translator, and artist currently living in Sydney. She's primarily known as a translator and as an abstract painter of the post-Islamic society of Iran. Kavani's translation of an article, Dog, the Long Winter, from a book by Shahnoosh Parsipour, was tabled on the Conference on Women and Depression in 2007, held in Sydney. In 2008, her painting, Dog and the Long Winter, was chosen for a poster for the Women's Mental Health International Conference in Melbourne, and the English version of this same book, the same painting, was published in 2011 by Noor Publishing Company in the US. Then Kavani continues to exhibit her paintings regularly. 2 of her paintings feature among the official final selections in My Favorite Movie Moments exhibition. 2006 Sydney Film Festival, and also her paper appeared in the first international symposium about Iranian cinema. 2 of her paintings have been selected for 100 years of imprisonment, an exhibition organized in the United States in support of political prisoners in Iran. In 2010, Kavani became the first Iranian-born Australian recipient of Edna Ryan Awards in category of arts, bestowed by the New South Wales Women's Electoral Lobby to women who have been pioneers in different walks of life. Thank you for joining us, Shokufeh.
Good morning, Nasim. I mean, good morning from me, because actually sun is gonna rise very soon in Sydney. So, so it's very actually interesting. You're gonna see more light from me. And thank you for inviting me. And it's just been so wonderful to listen to all these beautiful, wonderful women. I mean, all of them, Anjali, Jasmin, Nooshan, Usha, and thanks for organizing this. It's been a privilege, and for being in this panel. Thank you very much. And by the way, beautiful necklace, Nasim.
Thank you. I got it in Istanbul many years ago. So it's from Ozlem city.
Okay, okay. It's beautiful. It's really lovely.
Thanks.
Okay, so can I start now, Nasim?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Nasim, it's been very, very interesting to listen to all these speakers. And for me, I've got a different story from the rest of the speakers. As far as I've seen, they've been all writers. But for me, it's been all how I've been affected by these writers on my work. Yes. So I come from different aspect, different angle. As about Jasmin and Nooshan, I actually noticed they came to USA at a very early age, 5 and 10 years old. But I came to Australia when I was actually 27. So I was quite mature woman. And actually I was born in the, how can I say, turn of the history. I was born exactly 1970. And as you know, it was 1979 when the revolution happened, Islamic revolution in Iran. So I was 9 years old, and I remember all those days quite clearly because of my father, my family, and my sister, who later on became a political prisoner herself, and my brother, all of them. So I was quite young, but I was at the age could understand and comprehend what's going on. And the only thing who maybe saved me from getting into the danger, getting involved into serious politics was my youth, because I was not that young not to understand some these things, and not that old to get involved, because it was my brothers and sisters who paid the price, as being involved in different political groups. And later on, then I witnessed the start of the war, and I experienced that. I studied under the war, and I studied in the 80s, which was the darkest era of the Iranian history, as I call it, because it was the time that we had the war. We had the 2 big massacres of the Iranian political prisoners in Iran, and then end of the war, and all these things happened. And during this time, as we all know, how much pressure was on women. And because when the revolution happened, 3 years after revolution, I quite clearly remember that's how they started enforcing the compulsory hijab on women. And it was how it started from you cannot go to the offices, to the schools, to, all these important buildings without covering your head. And nobody really paid attention how important it is. For me, it's a reminder how the Nazis could establish themselves. This is how the Islamic government could establish themselves, by putting pressure on women, because they knew if they can do that, then later on men give up as well. And then after that, you could not go to the cinemas and parks, and then after that you cannot go to the schools, and you had to cover yourself eventually. And then they, little by little, they started taking all the rights from the women. And this was the time that, for me, who saw the previous revolution and then post-revolution era, as a child, as a young girl coming out of the age, how I have to direct my thoughts to which direction. Do I have to listen to what they're trying to teach me at school, or do I have to listen to what my parents tell me and what I remember, and from my sisters, and all these things that I remember? And that's how the writing comes in, because there were still lots of magazines and books from the pre-revolution era, which were obviously forbidden, but you could easily get them, through the black market. And then that's how we discovered reading. That's how I discovered reading. And I remember, the first Iranian female writer everybody knows is Simin Daneshvar, and how she affected us. And then for me, the first actually female writer who affected me was Oriana Fallaci, who she was quite brave young woman, and she was political and not scared to express her thoughts and talk about abortion and talk about all these big political figures and interview them. And even her sexual relationship with Alkos Panagolis on Omo, one man who is one of the Greek public figures or resistance leaders. And that's how I discovered actually my sexuality, that I can be a woman, and the things that they don't tell us, even how have a relationship with a man, and what are the men are, and all, and you can have political thoughts. And later on, from these Western writers, I moved to the Iranian writers, and it was the first waves of the Iranian female writers like Simine Daneshvar and Shahrnush Parsipur, as you said, that affected me and my generation, as well as my friends I could see in the school or other places. And then there came the second wave of the Iranian female writers like Ghazale Alizadeh and Moniro Ravanipur. And I had the privilege when I was studying in Bandar Abbas, southern part of Iran, Moniro Ravanipur's sister was my classmate. And because I was studying in the southern part of Iran and experienced that sort of life and seeing what the women go through, and all this pressure that's on them, and they still survive so silently, and how many stories they have to tell, and nobody talks about them. And suddenly we see a female, Moniro Ravanipur, who comes and actually talks about the things that we don't know as even Iranian women, and we cannot see, because I studied as a nurse in Iran, and later on when I came to Australia, I re-studied again to become a registered nurse again, and then my master's degree actually is in genetic counseling. But when I was in Iran, although I was going into people's houses and they were coming to the hospitals, and you see so many of the catastrophe that happens to the women, but nobody tells you, and you don't know, or there is always this shared secret that you don't dare ask question because nobody dares telling you. But then we have female voices that comes out, and they really affected me a lot. And then it went past to the third voice of the third wave of the female writers, which we see now, because there are now lots of Iranian female writers who write a lot, which is really good because they all started telling these stories. For example, in the central part of Iran, in Yazd, in the Yazd city, which is very religious, because if you are not even wearing a chador, maybe not now, but when I was growing up, even the taxis don't stop for you because they don't have respect for you. You have to wear a chador, full coverage. But in the same environment, it's a highest rate of incest, believe it or not, because all this covering makes people have more increased sexual desires, and the first victims of this are usually women. And then this is all, so these female writers' voices became very important. And I call it a miracle that they could pass through the censorship and pass through the Wazarat Irshad, the Ministry of the Culture in Iran, to be published. Because there is still a God, believe it or not, or whatever. So there are sometimes things can fall through the cracks and these things get published, like the Women Without Men by Shanusha Parsipur, which had great effect because it was for the first time so a woman spoke about the virginity, the taboo of the virginity, and also how a woman and woman can have sexual relationship without this ceremony, religious ceremony. So we hold that, and then that when I came back to us, when I came to Australia, I was 27, and I mean for you people like you who've gone to USA or Europe, there is still some knowledge about Iran in USA and Europe, as far as I call it. But when I came to Australia, believe it or not, nobody knew where Iran is, and there are still so many people who don't know or don't care. And they all want you to deny your past and say, oh God, forget all about it. But how can I forget 27 of my years of my life, you know, which affected me so much. So being an Iranian became like something that I have to hold on and I have to reflect. And this came through wars. Wars became a very important tool to reflect of what happened to me and my generation. You know, there is a verse, the first verse in the Torah, in the Old Testament is, it was the wars in the beginning and the wars were God, which is true because that's how you can express yourself. And the most important thing, as I think it was Nooshan who said, when you're young, you think nobody gonna listen to you and nobody gonna, you know, who cares about what I write or what I paint. But when I came to Australia, I remember I started going to the art galleries and things, and I was seeing all these horrible artworks, meaningless, you know, with no, I could not comprehend what they're trying to talk about. And then I realized I have something to offer. I really do. Because why, you know, somebody comes and paints something so stupid, believe it or not, I'm sorry, but like, and it sells for $20,000. And I've gone, my history is full of torment and, you know, all this, and I have something to say. So my work should be more like precious and more important than these things. So I actually took myself very seriously. And it's interesting, if you look at my painting, it was the words all written over my painting, because it was how I've been affected by literature, especially the female literatures. Because I'm a woman and I have to speak for myself. You know, it's important. I think it was Nooshan or Usha who said men try to silence you. It happens even now, even at workplaces. When you want to express yourself, it's always, you know, most of the time a man, and sometimes women, because women can be your worst enemy as well. They try to silence you, and it's not much even by words. It can be by hand gesture or by eye contact or something that you don't have the right to talk. It's domestic violence or violence towards women is not just by words, it's by the body language as well. And then that's what I realized, that I should not be silenced, although society might not like it, because somebody has to start somewhere and they better get used to it. And then I started taking my painting seriously, and then when you do that, then the doors opens for you, and then you find the people who actually pay attention to your work, like what you did now to me, and you know, invited me, and it happened all the way through. And you realize there are still so many women and so many men that they realize the society improves if they take women and what they say seriously. And on this way, I actually started translating a few books. My first book, which I translated about Rumi, published in Iran, which has been held captive for 7 years in the Iranian Ministry of Culture because of its photo. It's about the Mevlevi sect. And then I translated 2 more books about the Aboriginal stolen generation, because I found lots of similarities between myself and them, as because when lots of discrimination towards them and towards me as a migrant woman, as being treated as a second class citizen, especially when you're this is their country, but what happened to them made me really feel sympathetic about them. And then it was when I actually started translating The Dog and the Long Winter, written by Shahrnush Parsipur. Because what I realized was, this book as a true reflection of my life, because the main character of this book is a girl who has a special relationship with her brother, who is a political prisoner, and then when he comes back, he dies, but he totally dispatch himself from the life outside the prison and does not find any connection except with his little sister. And then after he passes away, she finds herself in the same situation and becomes really, really lonely and see the world through different angle. And this was exactly what happened to me, because I had a very close relationship with my sister, who actually protected me from all this Islamic teaching, which they're trying to brainwash us at a school. And it was because of her I could open my mind and learn and see myself as a woman. And because she was not trying to make me a man, but she was trying to teach me how to be a woman. And then I lost her as a political prisoner. And after that, I actually became totally different from rest of my friends, and I could see the world through different angle, and I could not really bend myself to what society tried to rule, to teach me and rule me and direct me and force me. And I, to be honest, I'm really proud of it. It's because maybe of my Kurdish background or something. And I'm not even now, I'm 50. I still feel that I've done really well in spite of all this pressure that I experience or my generation experience. And the more pressure they put on Iranian women, we had more artists, more writers, and more scientists, more teachers. And this all happened through the words, because whatever angle you look at it, it's the words who direct you and tell you what to do. And now I'm in Australia, and whenever people ask me, how old are you? I always say I'm 1,000 years old. I'm not even 50 years old, because I experienced a revolution, I experienced a war, I experienced a migration, and each one of them is actually enough trauma for one generation. And my generation has experienced 3 of them, And then as a woman, we survived in Iran, and we went through it, and we've done quite well. And I believe the future of Iran is in the hands of the women. And even now we have women like Nasrin Sotoudeh, who is a lawyer, but still her work is being publicized through the world by artists, by writers, and it encourages more women to write and to produce, because this is our nature to produce, even giving birth to the children, and teach our sons, our brothers, our husbands that let us talk, let us speak, let us write. Because honestly, I don't believe it's just men who suppress women. It's women also suppress women. And if we do more damage to ourselves than men, which is true. When a man gets into the position of a power, most of the men, no matter how bad is that man is, they protect him, and then they encourage him, and they support him. But women don't do that to themselves, and we damage ourselves more than men. And this is how the writing and how the art comes in. If we don't be intimidated and write and produce and express our views, and don't let no other women or men destroys us, because if we don't take ourselves seriously, nobody else does. And all through my work, through my art, through my translation, I always try to do that. And you know, if you look at my paintings, you always find a word in it. And as I said in the beginning, there was the word, and the word was the God. And that's, I think that's all I remember now, Nasim, to say. I don't know what else to add, and I just leave it to the audience and you know, answer the questions. Thank you very much. Nasim John, I cannot hear you. Nasim John, I cannot hear you.
Sorry.
Yes. Yes.
I'm saying
No worries.
I'm kind of speechless, because you could bring all those stories and histories and experiences all together in 15 minutes or 20. So bravo for that. And
Thank you.
oh my God, this is what I wanted to hear for so many years, because I don't see people speaking about these very important issues in academia, in, I don't know, literary communities or elsewhere. No, they just depend on the mainstream narratives and act upon that. So it's very sad, actually, very sad, really sad. But hopefully people like you can change all these narratives and challenge the process of marginalization of Middle Eastern women and South Asian women and Iranian women, especially, because again, I would like to reiterate that Iranian women are being treated so harsh in their homeland and also abroad. So thank you so much for bringing all these very important insights here. Thank you. So we have a few comments, or maybe more. Everybody, okay. Thank you for raising the issue of women harming women. You turn in patriarchy that has bothered me for years. That's very true. Even when it comes to the literary communities, I remember all these revolutionary guards had their female guards. They come, they, you know, disrupt and shut down everything. So it's not only, you know, men that actually engage in or perpetuate violence against literary communities and women and female writers. And if you want to look at it from a broader perspective, of course, from, you know, against women and LGBTQ people in general. Claudia says, thank you, Nasim and Ozlem, for organizing this panel. Thanks to all panelists who in their own unique ways rupture hegemonic narratives and repair them. This is a sacred mission. Usha brought up a great point, which was my question. We know that writing has always been a male-dominated sphere. Women's works have been devalued as autobiographical, domestic, etc. My question for you is, how do you disrupt this rhetoric? Also, do you prefer to be called a poetess or a poet? So this question, I think it's really interesting. So everybody should answer it if you can, and if you would like to do that. So maybe Anjali, maybe Usha.
Yeah, I think there are lots of responses in the chat box already to the question. And I think most of us seem to say that there's no preference to term. Poet is kind of gender neutral. Either is acceptable. And how does one continue to disrupt the rhetoric is to continue to do one's work. I think unapologetically, not to change what we write about and how we write about, but we write about what we must write about. And I find this is it's a question that brings up many ramifications, because in Matwala, this is something Pramila, who's here, my co-director, we've talked about. And the point of what is published, and are we changing our voices to be published? Do we change the kind of writing we write to be published? So I think we have to be strong and write about what we absolutely want to write about as poets, without worrying too much about the commercial aspects. Are we changing our voice in poems? Are we changing the way we use language? Are we changing the subject matter of our poetry? So again, I think I'm responding with more questions again. I think it's just a question of integrity and writing about what moves us and what is important to us. And then I think that becomes important to a certain readership, and it invites them in because it's something new. So
thanks so much. Any other comments or thoughts that you'd like to share with us? Jasmin, Nooshan, Shokufeh?
I was going to just tie in that, again, you have to go back to Claudia June's question here to us. Poet or poetess is fine. Either way, I think as long as we're seen, as long as we're heard, and I think you have to value yourself first. There will come a time, hopefully, that we don't have to justify the existence of our gender and our experiences and our pain and our sorrow and our joy. And I think that, again, the more pressure you put on someone to suppress and oppress them, the more they're going to want to flourish and bloom like a flower. And I am particularly touched and moved by the immense political and social restrictions that women in particular have in Iran, for example, or in other parts of the world, Afghanistan, Pakistan, other places. And from all of that pressure and all that silence, they still produce work. They still have the best playwrights, the best movies, the best poems, the best short stories, the most beautiful paintings and sculptures. I think that it just goes to show you that there is this desire, there's just innate human desire, especially among women, since the subject is women today, to survive and to beat down everything and all of the boundaries and all of the walls that have been placed around you to say, no, you can't say this, you can't talk about that, that's not a ladylike thing to do, that's not an appropriate thing to do, you don't want to upset somebody. I think that when you have that much pressure and you can still flourish, then obviously in freer societies, women should be able to do so as well. Now, I do agree that sometimes the misogyny and the sexism isn't coming from men, it's coming from other women. And that's particularly hurtful because idealistically, we like to think that women have a sense of sisterhood and there's a sense of support, and then there's a narrative of a community, and it isn't always there. And I think those microaggressions, again, the body language of sexism that some of you referenced, again, that unfortunately helps to fuel the fire of sexism and discrimination, and you have to get away from that. And that is something that is for all women. It doesn't matter where you were born, it doesn't matter what your ethnic composition or your religious background is, or even your socioeconomic status, but you have to set the new precedent that this is the way it's going to be. At some point, that umbilical cord of discrimination and second-class citizenry for women, it needs to be cut. It has to be cut somewhere, because then we're going to be sitting here 50 years from now having the same discussion. But I'm in awe. I mean, I feel just not worthy of even being around these amazing women, and not just on this panel, obviously, and those that are watching, but these women that produce these works that are just under the worst circumstances, and they're just beautiful, and it's courageous. And some of those women go to prison for that, and they're silenced for that, or they're killed for that. So I think that kind of courage is something that I like to aspire to. I wouldn't ever put myself in that category. Again, I'm not worthy of that, but I think it just gives me such hope and such optimism that the future will be much brighter for women of all backgrounds.
Thank you so much, Nooshan.
Sure.
So am going to, so Usha says, thank you for raising the issue of women harming women, a huge concern in patriarchy that has bothered me for years. Jessica says, I love Shokufeh's word, women can be enforcers of patriarchy. Thank you. And Usha says, I think poet is gender neutral. I am fine with either. Then Nooshan also already mentioned that poet or poetess is fine as long as we are here and see, it is fine. And then Claudia Yacobi says, these women are parts of patriarchal divided, a term used by Connell to refer to all those who benefit from patriarchy, even indirectly. Usha says, feeling so humbled and honored, joyous, and inspired by all of you. Thank you, Nooshan, Nasim, Ozlem, Jasmin, Anjali, and Shokufeh. So here are the comments, and I personally don't have any questions because you perfectly address everything, and we're so happy about it. So if the participants here have any questions in mind, or even if you have any comments, please just unmute yourselves and talk about it.
Nasim, yeah, can I just say something which I've forgotten to mention? Yes?
Yes, please. And all the panelists, please feel free to share things that you think that you want to share with us.
Yes, because I actually wrote this one, what I forgot to say. I just wanted to mention the work of my friends, Claire Atkins. I cooperated with her for 2 years because she wrote a book, Between Us. It's about an Iranian woman, actually, as a refugee in a detention center. And when she wanted to write this book, she had no idea about Iran. And she's actually from a Vietnamese father and Australian mother. She's actually like a dual nationality herself. But she didn't even know where Iran existed. And how she found me, and about 2 years when she wrote this beautiful love story, which is called Between Us, between an Australian boy and this Iranian girl who is in detention center, and the father of the boy who is actually the guard, one of the guards of this detention center. And it was interesting because during these 2 years when she was writing and I was correcting her and giving her information and giving her references, how we could connect so closely as with me and someone who had no idea where I come from, but could totally understand when I was talking to her. This is the power of the words. You know what I mean? How the writing can help we can help each other. And when she published this book, which was her second book, you won't believe it, how it won so many awards, being nominated for the Australian Prime Minister awards in 2020, and actually became the book of the year in 2020. And when I went to Canberra for, during the award ceremony, it was amazing how many people came to me because Claire was not present and I was representative, and they were talking to me through a book which we actually thought is a children's book, but it attracted so many adults. And then they wanted to know more about Iran, more about the Iranian women, because the way Claire represented an Iranian woman was not the picture of a suppressed or like a sort of women who anybody can tell her what to do. It was a very independent character in the book who actually dares to fall in love and not being scared to fall in love. And that how these wars can change the mentality of the people, and how important it is that we as a women cooperate with each other to change this mentality of the society. So I just wanted to acknowledge the work of the Claire Atkins, which I consider actually a very brave writer to touch an issue which she had no idea about.
Thank you, Shokufeh. So I see that Professor Parhami raised your hand. Am I right? Would you like to?
Yes. Yeah, I'll just say a few words. I already wrote this as a comment, but I might as well say it in person. As one of the few men in this gathering, I feel privileged to learn about the ideas of women writers and the reasons for writing. I must confess that I was unsure about whether I should attend this panel and whether there would be anything of interest to me. I'm in awe, I must say. I've been taking notes furiously, but I'm sure I couldn't capture all the important points that were made. I'm going to post my notes on Facebook and on Twitter, and I would welcome any comments and corrections once I do that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Parhami. Yeah, we will be waiting for your comments. And also then this webinar will be available on YouTube and other social platforms soon. So thank you so much. Anybody would like to share anything? Jasmin, Anjali, Shokufeh again.
I mean, I would say thank you to that. Thank you so much. And it did occur to me, it's interesting, just going off names, I think we have two men in attendance, and I'm not entirely I think that it's an incredible time to be a woman writer. I think women's stories are so compelling. It's just really, as Nooshan was saying, it's extraordinary, the quality and breadth of women's writing now. We're reading each other. I think we're hungry. We're so hungry for each other's stories. Of course, there's still the women who would repress others and silence, one another. But I do wonder about the piece of men reading us and a male readership. Overwhelmingly my readers are women. I am so grateful for them, but I'm also aware that I am not necessarily attracting a male readership. Now, it doesn't preoccupy me, but I'm noting it. And I'd say the only place where I do feel I make a difference really is in my teaching. So there I can command men to read women, and I haven't had any complaints, at least not overtly. I've been teaching literature for about 12 years. And, it's now, I used to hesitate maybe a little bit if I had half the women. It's very common now for me to have all women on the syllabus. I don't make any apologies about it. I will teach men too if I find that it's the most compelling version of a text I want to teach in the class. But as a professor, I feel I have that power. As a writer, I'm not as encouraged. I don't feel necessarily that my work is being embraced by a male readership. But it's not for nothing that women are holding up publishing in the United States, and this is probably true all over the world, is that the readers in the United States are women. What hasn't happened yet, and is beginning to happen, is that women are beginning to ascend positions of power in publishing. So at my publishing house now, within the last 10 years, there's been a revolution and women are at the helm. I'm with Random House. Now women are at the helm. There is now more attention to the fact that we have very few people of color within publishing. So you could have amazing literature, but if the gatekeepers are predominantly still men, if the publishers, if the prizes, are being doled out, and it is still very much predominantly men who are on the committees for these prizes, very few women, even lesser people of color on those committees. So I am I guess I'm fluctuating a little bit, but I would say I am encouraged by the greater attention being paid to these issues. I think the last 4 years, for all the pain and trauma that has been inflicted upon us, there's also been so much more awareness about diversity in publishing, about who actually is pulling the levers of power and foreclosing access to others, within the system. So just some thoughts about the gatekeeping that's going on, and possibly also this battle we have to be acknowledged among men readers too.
Thank you so much, Jasmin. So I think that we don't have any questions here in the chat box, and so
Nasim, we have Shushma Natani. I think she has something to say. She's raising her hand.
Oh, really? Yes, Sushma, please.
Hey, hi, this is my first time I attended this type of meeting, and thank you, Nasim, and everyone. It was wonderful.
Thank you for attending and for joining us today. Of course, I would like to say that we also expect men to participate and join this kind of meeting, because it's very, very important to learn about women's struggles, about their experiences. We often just go, get the books in the libraries and in the market, but this is a real experience, and this is a precious experience, because we bring all these women who are in the forefront of different struggles, whether it is writing, whether it is democratic struggles, whether it is struggles against tyranny. So come join us. I know some of you hide and watch it on Facebook, but it will be great. Come here, raise your question and concerns, of course. So thank you so much, everyone, and the panelists, the participants, and the speakers for taking your time out of the day to join us for this conversation. And we hope to see you in our forthcoming webinar next Saturday. That is, again, on why women write. And we're hoping that that will be a chance to learn more about marginalized voices, even though their voices are very important, but we see that they are being overlooked, unheard, and hopefully we can hear from them. And this pandemic will really change a little bit of, these injustices that is going on in the world, hopefully. So thank you so much, and see you next week.
Thank you, Nasim. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.